Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard. Welcome to the first Tournament Tactician of 2023, the premier tournament tier list for Legends of Runeterra. Now, the seasonal Tournament Tactician will be next Wednesday. That is when I will prep you for the actual seasonal tournament. For now, kind of taking a more reserved approach, waiting to see what happens here at the Mastering Runeterra January Open that is happening this weekend. I'll be casting with Sparkling Iced Tea, but going through some of the streams that I've seen, community scrims, as well as the Runeterra AR meta, this is kind of the level 1 tier list that I've come up with going into this weekend. Now, this could change a lot as we get into the actual seasonal tournament. Like I said, I'm kind of taking a wait-and-see approach, a little bit more reserved, trying to see how this weekend plays out before I really double down for the actual seasonal tournament. So, Aatrox and Jinx both seem to be the best performing decks right now. They fit into lineups very well, and they're kind of the things that the meta are going to be built around right now. Aatrox being these strong mid-range style decks, while Jinx having a couple of different flavors of aggro, as well as Echo Jinx being a little bit of a different one, and this is one of the highest win rate Echo decks that we've had in quite some time. So, you know, it is just a little bit of a less targetable variant of the Jinx if you do think that the champion is very strong. And that's one of the things I want to point out about this tier list is we're seeing a lot more champions rather than deck archetypes. Like Aatrox, yeah, you have Kayn Aatrox, you have Vayne Aatrox, Quinn. They play similarly enough that I think they both belong in tier 1. Same thing with the Jinx decks. At the end of the day, you are still just trying to get that Jinx online, leveled up, and get your super mega death rockets flowing. So whether you are playing a little bit more burn, a little bit more of a combo style with your other champion, or you're playing a more board-centric version, at the end of the day, the Jinx is the main focal point here. If people are looking to counter your deck, they're kind of looking to counter the Jinx half of it, not so much whatever other half that you have to complement it. And on the side of Aatrox, I think one of the reasons that you're seeing Kayn Aatrox be more popular than the Vayne Aatrox Quinn is simply cards like Furious Wielder, as well as the really just the Darkened Spells, the Unforgiving Cold, another one. Just these great tools for other mid-range matchups because you kind of out-tempo the control decks. Even if the FTR does manage to come down from Feel the Rush, then you still have a very large Aatrox and some other Darkens that you can get down, as well as your Frostbite spells, something that you don't really have in the Vayne Demacia version of the deck. And I think that the Vayne nerfs are significant enough that were I playing this weekend, I would definitely be on the Kayn Aatrox variant. Now, Aatrox is still a little questionable to me as to whether or not it is actually tier 1. This is something that the stats are pointing towards, and I'm curious to see how the weekend actually plays out for it. If I had to guess what the top 8 representation of these two champions is going to be, because we can't really go by decks, there's way too many decks split amongst them, which is going to make things even more of a pain when it comes seasonal time, and I try to predict what the most popular decks are going to be. But I would say that Aatrox is probably going to take, I'm going to say 4 top 8 spots, and Jinx, my gut says somewhere between 3 and 5, but that's a little bit too big of a window for a top 8. So I'm gonna double down and actually say like 3. I think that Jinx might end up being targeted really hard, but ultimately the amount of Jinx representation in the top 8 is what I'm looking for to give me a better idea on how the seasonal is going to play out. But I think that these two decks are pretty far above what everything else is doing and kind of stand alone in tier 1. But again, we're very willing to change our opinions based on what happens this weekend once we actually get to see what a competitive RL event looks like. Then we get into tier 2. FTR, just like FTR never feels tier 1 is probably the best way to put it. It is the standard for control at the moment. It does a lot of things that decks need to be aware of. I think it's one of the reasons that you're going to see more Kayn Aatrox than Vayne Aatrox is having access to the Frostbite spells for these atrocity decks. But at the end of the day, it does still feel just a little bit too slow to really be like a solid tier 1 contender. I don't even think it's necessarily going to be the most popular control deck. People are very in love with what the Nora Vygar is bringing to the table. And I don't really expect a whole lot of triple control in top 8. Maybe 1, but more than likely 0. If we're talking like FTR, Nora Vygar, and then like Heimer Jace for just a straight up triple control lineup. Leona is another champion that is feeling the split right now. We have the Leona Katarina, a very aggressive deck, and then we have Leona Aphelios, a much more mid-range deck with a winding light top end, going for that turn 7, turn 8 kill, depending on when you have the attack token. Whereas the Leona Katarina is probably what you're looking to like round out your aggro lineup if you're going like Jinx, Leona Katarina, and then either Annie Jhin or some kind of Gwen deck, or, you know, you could even go with like TF Swain or Conservatory, but not so much the Conservatory, and I'll get into that a little bit later because the Katarina is just a little bit too of a hot topic right now. Annie Jhin, it's still like a fine aggro deck. I think this might actually be the first season where if you are running triple aggro, Annie Jhin is not the go-to ban. It'll probably be the Jinx decks, and even if you're coming in looking to target the Jinx decks, you might end up banning the Leona in that case because The Leona deck is rather resilient to some of the 1 and 2 damage sweepers that you'd expect out of the Jinx deck, or to take care of the Jinx deck, rather. Just because you have, Crimson Pigeon is one of your 1-drops, the Solari Soldiers coming down as a 3/3, so if I'm not going for an open attack, I'm still, like, pretty immune to, like, Avalanche or Withering Wail or something like that. And that's, I think, why people are so big on Nora Vygar, is these decks are all very low to the ground, the aggro decks of the format, and Nora just does a little bit better of a job of, like, getting on board early and, not really playing for the sweepers and potentially getting blown out if your opponent has an answer for those. You know what I mean? And then Plunder is just another solid mid-range deck. It actually has the sweepers that we're looking for in the forms of Make It Rain, as well as the card that I never remember the name of that's like Spirits Unleashed. That's the one. Now, I do want to point out Wild's Claw Ferocity, a little bit of a weird one to me, but essentially what I did here is I just took the top lists off of Runeterra AR. I scrapped every sample list that I had. These are all the lists from Runeterra AR, so if they look a little bit weird, that's why. I didn't build them. These are the samples that you would find if you looked online today, so that's what I have for you. Not sure how I feel about Alpha Wildclaw and GP Sejuani. I'm not going to lie. I didn't really look at these samples before I put them up here, but apparently that is the highest win rate version of the deck, but definitely tweak these to your preference. You don't have to just copy paste these, but if you want to, you can. Is the purpose of these samples. So Plunder's still a very good option because you have these mid-range overwhelmed champions. Spirits Unleashed is just a very powerful card, both in terms of the board wipe that it's bringing, as well as the resilience that it gives you in the later stages of the game. Gives you a lot more scaling than you've had in Plunder in the past. So I am a little bit bigger on Plunder than I have been before, but that might change for the seasonal. Again, Plunder is something where we're usually seeing like 3 or 4 of it absolute max in the top 32, and while it feels like it's getting a little bit better every season, I still don't know that it's matching up to some of the other decks that are higher on the tier list. And again, we are not ordered within tiers. FTR is not the best tier 2 deck. Nora Vygar is not the worst tier 2 deck. Nothing like that. Getting into tier 3, we have some of the dredges, sort of your third deck in the lineup. Heimer Jace. I don't think anybody wants to run a control lineup and like starts with Heimer Jace. I'm pretty sure you're always starting with FTR or Nora Vygar. You don't have the sweepers that Trundle Tryndamere has. You don't have the ability to get online early like Nora Vygar does, but you are still a solid control deck. And if you do sort of have those god hands, right, where you can just open with the production surge into the turret buffer, whose name I'm forgetting. I have a cast tomorrow for this Runeterra event. I better start remembering card names real quick. Then we get into Gwen, which is one of the more interesting cards to me. Gwen is Red Gwen specifically, the Gwen Katarina. It's the second highest win rate deck on ladder, right? Or the second highest play rate deck on ladder. But it's very behind in win rate on Leona Katarina. And I think you're not really going to be running Gwen Katarina outside of like an aggressive lineup, because the builds that people have started to shift towards is we've just cut the Reckoners entirely since they were nerfed, and we've gone to just like this Shunpo Might sort of build. It feels a little all in. It kind of feels a little cheesy, sort of like Vayne Rumble almost, but like I look at this build and I hate it. And it reminds me a lot of like Lurk, of Vayne Rumble, and those are not decks that perform well in tournaments, though they will perform well on ladder. So that's kind of the read that I have on Red Gwen right now, and I'm really curious to see if this weekend changes my mind on that. And then Gwen Sejuani, sort of like Plunder, it's been in the weeds. It really hasn't been doing anything standout performance-wise. It's just kind of a solid deck. If you want to run it, that's fine. But the things I want to talk about more are like TF Swain. Conservatory is something that I think is a solid option for a third control deck, because you are, a control deck that gets on board early. You have like your House Spider, your Mirai Warden as options to combat something like Leona on board, or at least survive until you get into the late game. But I think that Katarina is still a very hotly contested champion, and you could probably find a better thing to be doing with her in your lineup if you are not hard committed to like a triple control style. And we even saw like at the World Championship, Maddie24 Mayo, the Conservatory deck was something that we were harping on all weekend, and it's just such a volatile deck in terms of like how quickly it can gas out, how low agency it can be in some hand states, how slow the Conservatory can be to get online. And I'm just not sure that this is where you want to be putting things like Twisted Fate and Katarina when you have other options like TF Swain or Leona Katarina, or even some or Red Gwen even. But again, not super big on Red Gwen, but willing to be wrong on that one. So TF Swain I think is like fine. Again, it's a rather threat light deck, so I'm a little nervous for it if the players are expecting it, and like Nora Vygar has come equipped with like Aloof Travelers, which I think they will, because you expect Jinx or Echo to be the highest costed card in the Jinx decks. If you can hit the Aatrox, that's very good. If you can hit the FTR or any of the champions, that's great. Ravoon I think is here. This is like Decimate and Jhin. This is the champions. This is Pretty sure. I mean, it's random 6-cost spells. Yeah, the Aloof isn't great versus Heimer Jace, but I think that Aloof is like looking pretty good into the meta. So if you are running like Nora Vigar or Heimer Jace, I definitely like running hell 2 to 3 copies of Aloof Travelers. And TF Swain is something that's going to fall victim to that. One of the big problems with this deck has always been the fact that it doesn't have a lot of threats outside of Swain and Leviathan. And if you're running it 1 Riptide Rex, that's really all you've got. So if you are up against like an Aloof Vengeance deck, which there might be 2 of, you can definitely run into a rough sort. But again, I think that triple control has like looked good for a few seasonals, not necessarily the last few seasonals, but there have been a few seasonals where it's looked good, and you just don't really see it too often. I don't think that you're going to see a lot of people on like Nora Vigar plus Heimer Jace with Aloof Travelers in it. So TF Swain is like probably going to be a fine choice for the event, but maybe this is like not as good a choice for like the top 32 of the seasonal, but we're a ways away from talking about that. So for this weekend, I think TF Swain is an absolutely fine choice. And then Sundisk, Ziggs, Talia are sort of counters to that triple aggro, or triple control rather, style of play that, again, we just like do not see a lot of. It is not a very popular archetype to go for, and I think Sundisk, Ziggs, Talia is very volatile into the Jinx decks. In the Aatrox decks, I'll give you a run for your money. It's very scary to be running these in a tournament right now. I don't recommend it, but I do know that people are going to do it, so I wanted to shout it out on the tier list, because you do have a place in the meta, and it's countering those triple control lineups. I just don't think you're going to be seeing enough of that to make it worth it. So, that is the tier list. Just kind of easing myself back into content, so quick and easy one for now, a very level 1 tier list, no real hot takes here, I don't think, just kind of going off of the publicly available data. And then once this tournament happens this weekend, maybe I'll have some hot takes for you next Wednesday when I do the seasonal edition of Tournament Tactician. But for now, that is what I have for you. Content's going to be light for the next 10 days, about week and a half. I have some cool stuff in the pipeline, some very cool stuff that has taken me away from YouTube, and I promise it'll be worth it. It'll be very exciting, but I cannot talk about it just yet. So that'll do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Boulevard. As always, good luck in your tournaments.